On a quiet Saturday morning in Plano, Texas, a street that usually echoed with the sound of lawnmowers and children's bicycles suddenly became the stage for something out of a courtroom drama. The air was calm, the sun bright, the kind of day when trouble was the last thing anyone expected. But at the end of one driveway, trouble was exactly what appeared. Two men in tactical vests stood shoulder to shoulder, their boots planted firmly on the concrete. Between them was the local homeowners association president, Whitfield. They were waiting for one man, Reginald Carter. Reginald had left his home that morning carrying nothing more threatening than a trash bag. He was relaxed, casual, simply heading to the curb like he had done countless times before. But when he looked up and saw the trio blocking his path, he slowed to a stop. Something wasn't right. The two men might have looked like honest officers to a nervous neighbor glancing from a window. Their vests bore stitched-on patches that read "Community Enforcement," and their stern faces carried the weight of authority. But Reginald noticed the details. One vest was too big, its straps hanging loose. The other was scuffed and cheap, the kind of gear you'd find in a surplus bin, not on professionals. Their stance was stiff, rehearsed, like men pretending to know what they were doing. And Reginald knew instantly, these weren't real cops. Linda spoke first, her tone sharp and rehearsed as if she had practiced it in the mirror. "Mr. Carter, we need to talk." Reginald carefully placed the trash bag on the ground, resting his hands on his hips. His voice was calm, almost casual. "About what?" That was when one of the men stepped forward. He was tall and pale, with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. His voice was flat, robotic, as he declared, "Community enforcement. You violate neighborhood regulations. We're here to detain you until police arrive." The words dropped heavy in the air. Detain him? Over neighborhood rules? Linda crossed her arms tightly. "You've ignored repeated notices. This has gone too far. We can't have someone undermining our community standards. These men are here to make sure you comply." The second man, shorter and broad-shouldered with a messy beard, pulled a folded paper from his vest and rattled off supposed charges. "Property violations. Unauthorized modifications to your driveway. Loud gatherings. Non-compliance with HOA orders." The list goes on. Reginald almost laughed at the absurdity. His tone sharpened as he replied, "So you think that gives you the right to walk onto my property and, what did you call it, detain me?" The tall man's jaw tightened. "That's right. You can come peacefully, or we'll make it harder." For a moment, silence filled the block. A curtain shifted in the house across the street. Another neighbor peeked through the blinds. Phones lifted discreetly to capture what was unfolding. A teenage boy across the street even stepped onto his porch and pressed record. The quiet suburban block was transforming into an audience for a showdown. Reginald took one slow step forward, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Let me explain something to you. There is no such thing as community enforcement. You're not law enforcement. You don't have any authority here. And right now, you're trespassing on my property." Linda's face flushed red with anger. Her voice rose, sharper than before. "Don't talk to me about authority, Reginald. You think you're above the rules because of who you are. We've had real complaints, and I'm not going to sit by while you drag this neighborhood down." The bearded man shifted nervously, but the taller one held firm, his hand hovering just above his belt, a gesture meant to intimidate, to make Reginald believe he was armed. Reginald studied them closely. He had seen men like this before, men who dressed the part but didn't have the backbone or the training to follow through. Wannabes who thought a vest and a scowl made them untouchable. They didn't know that Reginald Carter wasn't just a homeowner. He wasn't just another man with a lawn to mow and trash to take out. He was a highly trained federal agent, a man who had spent years dismantling dangerous criminal networks and facing down cartel enforcers who were far more dangerous than these two imposters could ever pretend to be. But Reginald didn't reveal any of that. Not yet. Instead, he smiled and said quietly, "You picked the wrong driveway today." Linda stepped closer, her voice trembling with both anger and desperation. "Don't test me, Reginald. These men can hold you until the police arrive, and when they do, you'll be the one answering questions." At that moment, Reginald finally dropped the trash bag he had been holding. It split slightly as it hit the ground, a soda can rolling across the driveway, clattering against the concrete. The sound echoed down the block like a warning bell. This wasn't the sound of surrender. It was the sound of a man planting his feet, ready for whatever came next. The neighbors felt it too. Curtains moved again. Windows cracked open. More phones tilted out from porches. The spectacle was growing. The taller man stepped forward, boots scraping against the driveway. His mirrored shades reflected Reginald's steady, calm face. "Sir, don't make this difficult. You're being non-compliant. That means we have the right to escalate." Reginald tilted his head, his lips curling into the faintest smirk. "Escalate? You're standing on my property with no badge, no legal authority, and no clue how deep in trouble you already are. You've got 30 seconds to back off before you regret this stunt." Linda snapped her head toward him, her voice dripping with irritation. "You think threats are going to make this better? You've ignored letters, warnings, and fines. The HOA exists to keep this neighborhood safe and respectable. People like you." She stopped herself suddenly, but it was too late. Reginald caught it instantly, his eyes narrowing. His voice cut like a blade. "People like me, huh?" Careful how you finish that thought, Linda. The words hung in the air. Neighbors who were recording shifted uneasily, realizing the deeper undertone. A woman whispered on her porch. Another neighbor muttered, "Did you hear that?" The bearded man tried to intervene, his voice lower, almost pleading. "Look, this doesn't need to get ugly. Just come with us. Wait for the officers. Clear this up. Maybe they'll go easy on you." Reginald's reply was flat, almost mocking. "Officers? You mean the actual police? Or the fake badges you two probably ordered online?" The tall man stiffened, but his partner looked at Linda nervously, as if realizing the illusion was collapsing. Linda tried to push forward, desperate to salvage her control. "These men are authorized by the whole board to ensure compliance. We don't have to answer to you." Reginald chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Listen to yourself, Linda. You brought two men in bargain bin tactical gear to my driveway. You really think that's how the law works?" By now, the crowd was growing bolder. Phones pointed openly. Someone even shouted from across the street, "Leave him alone!" The tension was thick. What began as a petty host stunt was turning into a neighborhood standoff, and Reginald knew it would only escalate. The air grew heavier with every passing second. What started as a confrontation in one man's driveway had transformed into a whole neighborhood spectacle. Curtains no longer hid curious eyes. Windows were open, porches filled, and phones captured every flicker of tension. It was as if the entire street had turned into a courtroom, with Reginald standing tall on one side and Linda with her imposters on the other. The taller man in the mirrored sunglasses tried to hold his ground, but his voice betrayed him. "Last chance, sir. Come quietly, or we'll restrain you." Reginald didn't flinch. His calm tone cut sharper than any threat. "Son, I've dealt with cartel enforcers who were less reckless than you. Do yourself a favor and step back before this turns into something you can't walk away from." For the first time, doubt flickered across the man's face. His bearded partner shifted uneasily, whispering under his breath, "Maybe we should wait in the street." But the taller man snapped at him, refusing to back down. Desperate to regain control, Linda barked, "Why should the rest of us live by the rules while you do whatever you want, Reginald? We have an order, and if you won't respect it, then maybe you don't belong here at all." Her words rippled through the crowd. Murmurs rose, some neighbors shaking their heads. The line between authority and harassment was becoming clearer with every second, and Linda's side looked weaker. Reginald's voice carried, firm but never loud. "Respect isn't forced with fake cops and threats, Linda. Respect is earned. And what you're doing isn't about rules. It's about control." The bearded man's nerves cracked. He tugged at his partner's sleeve and muttered, "Man, this isn't worth it. Everyone's watching." But his warning fell on deaf ears. The taller imposter suddenly reached into his vest and pulled out a pair of metal handcuffs. They clattered together as he held them up, the sound slicing through the chatter of the block. Gasps erupted, phones zoomed in closer. "You're under neighborhood arrest," he barked, though his voice cracked slightly, betraying his bravado. "Don't make me put these on you the hard way." Reginald's eyes locked on the cuffs, then flicked back to the man's face. His reply was slow, deliberate, and each word was heavy with authority. If you take one more step toward me with those cuffs, you're committing a felony and impersonating an officer. Attempted unlawful restraint. That's prison time. Not community service. Prison. The bearded man panicked, whispering harshly, "Eddie, this is crazy. We can't actually cuff him. We'll get locked up ourselves." But Eddie, the taller one, shoved him back. "I said I've got this." His pride was louder than his reason. Linda tried to stoke the fire. She raised her chin and shouted, "Do it. Don't let him intimidate you. Put him in cuffs. Show this neighborhood who's in charge." But her words backfired. The neighbors erupted in outrage. One voice cut through. "You don't have the right, Linda." Another shouted, "This isn't enforcement. It's harassment." The tide of public opinion was turning swiftly and loudly against her. Reginald seized the moment, stepping slightly closer to Eddie. His voice dropped to a chilling calm. "You lay one finger on me, and I promise you, the real police won't even have to ask who you are. They'll already know because I'll walk them through every mistake you've made in the last 10 minutes. You think you're intimidating me? I dismantle men like you for a living." The words hit like a hammer. Eddie froze, his arm locked, the cuffs dangling uselessly at his side. His bravado cracked under the weight of Reginald's calm authority. The crowd rumbled with approval. Neighbors shouted over one another, "He's right, leave him alone. You're done." But Linda wasn't finished. Her voice shrieked over the noise. "You don't belong here, Reginald. You never have. That's why you're fighting so hard." The crowd gasped. The ugliness of her words echoed louder than anything else she had said. "That's enough, Linda," one neighbor yelled. "We all heard you." Reginald didn't lash back with anger. Instead, he looked at her with quiet disappointment, letting the silence condemn her more than any argument could. He turned back to Eddie and his partner. "Take my advice. Walk away now. Because the next chapter in this story doesn't end with you walking home. It ends with flashing lights, handcuffs, and charges you won't be able to explain away." For a moment, it seemed like they might retreat. The bearded man named Shaw finally tore the Velcro patch from his vest and tossed it to the ground. His voice cracked as he shouted, "I'm out. I didn't sign up for this mess." The cheap fabric fluttered against the driveway like a confession. The neighbors gasped. All eyes turned to Eddie. His hands trembled, the cuffs rattling as sweat dripped from his forehead. Pride battled fear, and fear was winning. "Think carefully," Reginald pressed, his voice low and intimate. "Linda won't be there when the police ask questions. She won't sit beside you in court. She won't do your time. She'll save herself, and you'll be the one wearing real cuffs." The words broke through. Eddie's grip faltered. The cuffs slipped from his hand and clattered to the pavement. The sound rang out louder than Linda's protests. "No!" she screamed. "Pick them up, don't let him win." But Eddie didn't move. He backed away a step, his chest heaving with regret. Reginald bent down, picked up the cuffs, and held them high so the neighbors could see. This is what happens when you confuse control with justice. When you mistake fear for respect. But this isn't justice. It's fraud. The crowd buzzed louder. Phones zoomed in on the gleaming cuffs in Reginald's hand. It felt like the verdict had been delivered, but Eddie's pride wouldn't let him walk away quietly. With a burst of reckless energy, he lunged forward, shoving past Shaw, trying one last time to force the cuffs back into play. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, "Don't touch him!" But Eddie's mistake was fatal to his illusion. In one fluid motion, Reginald sidestepped, seized Eddie's arm, and twisted it behind his back with surgical precision. The cuffs Eddie had tried to use now snapped shut around his wrists. In less than 3 seconds, the tables had turned entirely. Eddie stumbled to his knees, crying out more from shock than pain. The crowd erupted in disbelief. "Did you see that?" one neighbor shouted. "He didn't even fight back. He just moved." Reginald held Eddie in place with minimal force, his voice calm, professional, almost businesslike. "You're done. Don't resist. It'll only make it worse." Linda's face twisted with horror. What are you doing? You can't arrest him. Reginald's eyes snapped to her, sharp as steel. You're right, I can't. But I can detain him for impersonating an officer until real law enforcement arrives. And considering he just attempted to assault me on my own property, the charges keep stacking. The neighbors erupted again. Some clapped. Others shouted at Linda. You set this up. You pushed them too far. This is on you. Shaw backed up several steps, hands raised high. I'm out. I didn't touch anybody. I just want to go home. His voice cracked with fear. Lady, you never told us he was law enforcement. Reginald's reply was steady and cutting. That's because she didn't know. And then, with the entire neighborhood watching, Reginald reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and flipped it open with practiced ease. The gold badge glinted in the Texas sun. I'm Special Agent Reginald Carter, he announced. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The street went silent. The only sounds were the leaves rustling in the wind and Eddie's ragged breathing as he knelt, cuffed on the driveway. Neighbors stared, mouths open, their phones capturing every second. A teenager shouted from across the street, No way! He's FBI! Mrs. Henderson, standing with her husband on their porch, whispered, I knew he carried himself differently. The crowd's whispers swelled into a collective wave of disbelief and respect. The truth had shattered the illusion completely. Reginald's gaze locked on Linda. His voice carried with finality. You came onto my property with imposters, Linda. You endangered your neighbors, thinking intimidation would give you control. But you didn't do your homework. You had no idea who you were dealing with. Her lips trembled, but her authority was gone. The once untouchable president of the HOA stood exposed, surrounded not by loyal neighbors, but by witnesses who had just watched her scheme collapse in the harsh light of truth. The moment hung heavy in the air. Reginald Carter stood tall, the FBI badge gleaming in his hand, while Eddie knelt cuffed on the driveway, his bravado shattered. Wide-eyed, Shaw lingered near the curb, wanting nothing more than to disappear. And Linda, the once proud and untouchable HOA president, stood trembling, her face pale, her voice caught between rage and desperation. The silence was broken by a sound that could not be ignored, sirens. Sharp, undeniable, rolling down the block. Red and blue lights flickered in the distance, growing brighter with each passing second. Neighbors stirred on their porches, whispering, recording, waiting for the drama's final act that had consumed their quiet street. Eddie's shoulders slumped, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. His fight was gone, replaced by fear of what was coming once those squad cars stopped in front of Reginald's home. Shaw raised his hands, muttering to himself repeatedly, I didn't touch anybody. I want to go home. Linda's eyes darted from one neighbor to another, searching desperately for an ally. But all she found were cameras and shaking heads. The patrol cars finally pulled up, tires crunching against the asphalt. Two officers stepped out, their hands near their belts, eyes scanning the scene with suspicion. One of them barked, hands where we can see them. Reginald immediately raised his free hand while keeping Eddie restrained with the other. His voice was calm, clear, and authoritative. Officers, I'm Special Agent Reginald Carter, FBI. Badge in my pocket, identification ready. The man in my custody attempted to impersonate law enforcement and assaulted me on my property. The officers exchanged quick looks, their eyes flicking from the badge in Reginald's hand to the dozens of neighbors standing with phones raised. One of the officers, a broad man with dark hair, stepped forward and held out his hand. Let me see your credentials, sir. With precise movements, Reginald produced his ID. The officer studied it carefully, then looked back at him with a shift in expression. Respect mixed with relief. All right, Agent Carter, you're good. We'll take him from here. The crowd buzzed louder as the officers lifted Eddie to his feet and guided him toward a squad car. His wrists were still cuffed, but now the cuffs held absolute authority behind them. Linda's voice broke into a frantic cry. Wait, no. He's not the criminal here. Reginald is. He's twisting everything. You have to believe me. Another officer, a younger woman with sharp eyes, turned to her. Ma'am, we've got multiple witnesses, and from what I see, this looks very bad for you. Did you authorize these men to act as law enforcement? Linda's mouth opened, but no words came. The neighbors didn't stay silent. Voices rang out from porches and sidewalks. "She brought them here." One shouted. "We saw it." Another added. "She told them to arrest him." The officer's tone hardened. "Ma'am, you need to step aside. If you continue to interfere, we'll treat this as obstruction." Linda's shoulders sagged, her composure breaking. For years, she had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist disguised as leadership, but under the flashing red and blue lights, her authority meant nothing. As Eddie was loaded into the back of the squad car, Linda stood frozen, her image of control dissolving into humiliation. Shaw was next. One officer approached him cautiously. "We'll need your statement." "Don't move." Shaw raised both hands higher, shaking his head. "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything. I didn't want this to go this far. I didn't know she'd push it this way." His words tumbled out in desperation. Reginald, still calm, addressed the officers. "Don't forget instigation. She orchestrated this entire stunt." His eyes cut toward Linda, who flinched under the weight of his steady gaze. The officers didn't ignore his words. They also guided Linda toward a squad car, her protests falling flat. "You can't arrest me. I'm the whole president," she screamed, but the crowd only shook their heads. One man muttered, "That title doesn't place you above the law." Another whispered, "About time." As Linda was escorted past her neighbors, their phones recorded every step. Her once proud image was shattered as she was placed into the exact vehicle as the imposters she had hired. Reginald stood near his porch, his posture steady, his expression calm. The neighbors watched him in silence, many of them realizing for the first time who had been living among them. A man who waved politely while mowing his lawn wasn't just another suburban homeowner. He was the one who had protected them from a dangerous abuse of power. The block seemed to exhale simultaneously as the squad cars prepared to drive away. A few neighbors clapped softly. Others whispered words of thanks. Mrs. Henderson clutched her husband's arm and said quietly, "He's not just a neighbor anymore. He's the one who stood up when no one else could." But Reginald didn't bask in the moment. He hadn't asked for applause, and he didn't want recognition. His focus was on the lesson the neighborhood had just witnessed. The following days were filled with tension. The videos of the confrontation spread like wildfire. First, it is on Facebook groups and neighborhood forums, then local news, and finally, national morning shows. The headline ran everywhere. HOA president detained after confrontation with FBI agent neighbor. For many residents, it was vindication. They had quietly resented Linda's heavy-handed leadership for years, but no one had pushed back until now. By Tuesday, the whole board emailed to announce an emergency meeting to determine the next steps. Everyone knew what that meant. Linda was finished. Meanwhile, Eddie's mugshot and a record of petty crimes and unpaid fines appeared online. Shaw, however, cooperated fully with the police, admitting Linda had lured them in with promises of pay and power. The neighborhood buzzed with disgust as the truth came out. Linda had used coded language for months, hinting that Reginald wasn't a good fit for their community. By Wednesday, neighbors gathered informally in the park to talk. Reginald hadn't planned to attend, but when he jogged by, they waved him over. One man spoke up respectfully. "Agent Carter, we just want to thank you. What you did showed us all what was really going on." Reginald shook his head. "I didn't do it for a recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I live here, too. My family lives here, and I wasn't going to let intimidation rule this street." A woman holding her daughter's hand added, "But it's bigger than that. You showed us that fear only works if we let it. Linda's been making people feel small for years, and no one pushed back until you." Reginald crouched down to the little girl's level, his voice gentle. "That's the lesson you need to remember. Bullies get power when good people stay quiet. But when you stand your ground, when you speak truth, fear loses its grip." By the end of the week, the board voted unanimously to remove Linda from her position. Her chair sat empty, a symbol of her fall from power. A new president was chosen, one who promised transparency and humility. The neighborhood began to heal, but the memory of what had happened on Reginald's driveway lingered. A week later, the HOA called a special gathering in the park. Nearly every family attended. Children played in the grass, neighbors filled folding chairs, and a quiet anticipation settled over the crowd. Reginald hadn't come to speak, but the interim president invited him forward. He hesitated, then stepped up. His voice wasn't loud but carried, and the crowd leaned in. Last week, we all saw what happens when authority is faked. When power is used to intimidate instead of protect. It could have gone very differently. Someone could have been hurt. Kids were watching. Lives could have been ruined. But what please take away isn't about me or even the FBI. It's about the kind of neighborhood we want to live in. Do we want fear to govern our streets or respect and accountability? Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Reginald continued. Leadership isn't about control. It's about service. Service means putting people first, even when it's inconvenient, even when you don't get credit. That's the difference between authority and arrogance. Remember this, silence is what bullies feed on. But when you stand together, when you speak truth, the game ends. The neighbors clapped, not wildly, but with heartfelt respect. Parents leaned down to whisper lessons to their children. Teenagers were filmed and determined to share the message online. And for the first time in years, the block felt united. Later that evening, as the sun set, Reginald stood at the end of his driveway. The same place where imposters had tried to strip him of his dignity now felt different. It wasn't just his driveway anymore, it was a reminder, a landmark where truth had stood taller than intimidation. He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. The truth always comes to light. For those who had watched the standoff unfold, the moral was clear. Absolute power doesn't come from titles, intimidation, or fear. It comes from honesty, accountability, and the courage to stand firm when it matters most. And so, I ask you, the listener, in your own life and community, are you building with fear or with respect? Are you staying silent or speaking truth when it's hardest? Because that is the choice we all face, whether we wear a badge or not. If this story resonated with you and made you think about leadership, justice, and the meaning of proper authority, then subscribe. Stories like this remind us that the fight for justice sometimes doesn't happen in courtrooms or distant cities. Sometimes it happens right where we live.